Hello and welcome to episode 7 of How to Become a Pro Wrestler. This week we're going to be talking about a question I get asked a lot, which is when should I start training? And that applies to lots of different people for lots of different reasons. Some people ask when should I start training in terms of age, as in am I too young, am I too old? Some people ask about when should I start training in terms of fitness level, such as, people want to know, do I go to the gym and get ripped, or do I start training, or do I just get straight into it? There's different methodologies when it comes to that, but let's tackle age first. So I'm going to start on the older side of things. Am I too old to start training? We've covered this in brief detail in previous podcasts, but to be honest, I would not like to put an upper limit on age on when to start pro wrestling. I think you have to be sensible and realize that I think one of the key misconceptions about wrestling is when people look at pro wrestling, they think that, it's like a big trampoline. Guarantee when you take that first bump, it is going to feel like a car crash, because it's not a bouncy castle. It is basically steel girders reinforced with wood, and then a small piece of padding and then canvas over the top. So what I'm saying is maybe best not to do it if you're, 100 years old and have severe back problems. But does that mean that you can't be in the pro wrestling business? No, you could be a manager, you could be a promoter, you could be a referee, you could be a valet. There's so many things that you could do. But that being said, nowadays it's like 50 is the new 30, So again, like you look at somebody like David Arquette, who's coming back into the business now. Why can't he be a star in today's era? There's no reason why not. As long as you're fit and healthy, I don't really want to put an upper age limit on telling people when they can and can't train. I don't think age is really what you look out for. I think it's kind of, it's about taking care of yourself and being smart about that. So we've got the age side of things discussed there. Again, you know the stories. The one I used to look at, we all do it when we're pro wrestling fans. We go on Wikipedia and we go, how old was this person when they did this? How old? Oh man, they were world champion by this age. DDP is always the example. He started, in the business late on, but I think he didn't start actually wrestling regularly until he was about 35, and he became a multiple-time world champion. So there you go. And that was back then when we knew way less about, yoga and looking after your body and nutrition and proper diet and training and things like that. So with the advances that we've got now, I think you could push that even further. So to be honest with you, I think, there's exceptions to every rule, but I wouldn't like to put an upper age limit on it. I would encourage people to do what they want to do. And also, I'll give you an example. Johnny Saint, who, British wrestling legend, who, was just an amazing, it still is an amazing technician. The reason I say still is because I did seminars with him a few years ago when he hoisted me up on his shoulders, and threw me off with ease, and he's still got a spring in his step. So Johnny Saint, and, at his age, he can still go. When he takes you down, you're going down. So again, it's best not to put an upper age limit per se on it. If the professional wrestling is something that you really want to do, again, this is where it comes back to the first episode, which is find a reputable training school. Because if you've got a trainer who really knows what they're doing, they're not going to put you in a situation where you're going to get hurt. Whereas if you go to, it might be your local schooler or whatever, just because it's close to you, and they're wanting you to take tombstone pile drivers on your first day and chops is the first lesson, then you're probably not in the right place. So again, all of this really comes down to being smart about choosing your training school. We've spoken about this before, but I'll summarize it for you. Basically, look for somewhere where the trainer has actually achieved great things themselves and or produced talents who have achieved great things as well. There are cases, of course, where you get amazing wrestlers who aren't good teachers. You get great teachers who haven't done as much in the pro wrestling business, and there's examples on both sides. I'm just going to fix this mic, so just bear with me a second. Please bear with the interference here. This mic is just falling off the clip that we've got for it, so I'm just setting it back there. There we go. Good to go. So I'll give you an example. And someone who's known for being a trainer more than a professional wrestler is Danny Cage. But if you look at his resume, he's trained Matt Riddle. I think he trained Steve Cutler as well. He's got about 5 people who are signed right now to major organizations. So again, the Monster Factory, if you're anywhere near that would be a recommendation for me. So if you live in America, we've done a lot of talking about British wrestling schools, but that's what I would say, that would be a recommendation of mine in the States. But there's so many amazing schools. But there you go. There's the things to look out for. So again, in terms of when should I start training in terms of fitness, again, different people have different mentalities to this. Again, mentioning Danny Cage there, as far as I know, his mentality, and I do, to be honest with you, I think, in my opinion, he's one of the trainers that I respect the most because of his work ethic towards training. And he tends to come out from an angle of, you know what, let's just get down here, let's just get you through the door, and let's just get going, and let's get you fit using wrestling. And to be honest with you, that is quite hard to disagree with, because everyone has great intentions of, oh, I'm going to get in shape and blah, 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 and then I'm going to start wrestling, which is all great and well if you're a very disciplined person to do that, but chances are you might not be the most disciplined person, which is perhaps, that might be one of the reasons why you haven't got stuck into wrestling so far. So if you give yourself the not excuse, but the space to go, well, I'm not going to do it until this, you might be in danger of putting it off even longer. Whereas when you just start training and you get into it, the pressure of your peers will probably be greater than the pressure that was in your own mind to achieve your own goals. And I mean that in a positive way. If your peers are achieving things, then you're going to be achieving things as well. So it's that thing, again, when I was at university, I had no business getting the grades that I did, but I actually managed to scrape a first-class degree, not because I was a scholar, but because I hung around with people who were just winners and they knew what the hell they were doing, and it rubbed off on me to a certain extent. The same goes for professional wrestling as well. If you're surrounded by amazing talents, the likelihood is you're going to get pretty good. But let's take that down to the training school level, which is basically if you're in a training school where everybody else is working hard, everybody else is in shape, everybody's working on their promos, chances are that's going to push you further than it would with just you in your own head sitting in your room. So I tend to agree with that, right? Yes, you're going to need a basic level of fitness because, like, where I trained at, I've said this before, I trained, sorry, I'm just going to get rid of one of the comments there. We do get some abusive people in the comments from time to time. Bear with me 1 second, folks. But fair enough. Whatever makes someone's day. Sorry, I just have to kind of moderate the comments as I go here. We are live on Twitch right now. But basically, so to answer some of the questions on the Twitch that I'm looking at, and Sean's asking, yes, Sean, if you could moderate the comments, that'd be awesome. If you're able to do so, that would be great. Just go for it. So basically, I'm looking at people asking me where I trained. I trained at Source Wrestling School. And again, I came through at the same time. Well, obviously they'd started before me, but from that school, you got, the Coffey Brothers, Jackie Polo, you got Viper, Lewis Gervin, myself, Nikki Cross, Damo, aka Killian Dane. So, I'd looked at the seminars there and we'd had, the likes of Finn Balor and John Laurinaitis and stuff like that. So again, look at the seminars of the places that you're going to. But just to get back to where I was, chances are you probably want to just get training, but you do need that basic level of fitness. So I do think that you should get to a point where you're able to, sorry, bear with me 1 second. I do think you should get to a point where you're able to perform basic fitness functions. So, for example, if you look at some of the drills that pro wrestlers do, and if that just seems like something you couldn't possibly imagine yourself doing, then maybe you want to take a month and you maybe just want to go and do some light cardio, a few times a week just to get yourself prepared. But if you're like myself, I find that sometimes trial by fire is the best way to do it. You just want to get stuck right in. And to be honest, that is the quickest way to do it. So, to summarize it best, I think what you want to do is just get going. That would be my advice. But what I do want to do is I want to talk about the other end of the scale, which is when people say, what age should you start training? When is too young? And basically, I'll give you an example. At shows, I had this guy come up who goes, "Oh yeah, my daughter wants to be a pro wrestler, so I'm training her. I'm training my daughter." And I've never heard of this guy. I've never heard of the training school he was talking about. But he's going, "I'm training my daughter to wrestle." And I'm like, how old is she? And it's like she was like 10 or something like that. And you don't want to just stand there and go, "Well, how about let's not put your kid through some what could be permanent damage by what's likely going to be improper teaching and just something that the kid shouldn't be doing at that age." You don't want to be that rude, but I did have to kind of be direct and say, I don't really think this is a good idea. And the reason I don't think it's a good idea for kids to train pro wrestling at that age is because the human body isn't built for bumping as it is, let alone a child. You know what I mean? So, and also, life is short, but life is long as well. Okay, so it's like you don't necessarily need to rush into these things. The thing you got to understand is if you get into pro wrestling at 10 years old, right, you're going to be surrounded by pro wrestling culture from that age, and that's going to be your life, and you're going to be the pro wrestler. Well, guess what? There's thousands of other pro wrestlers out there. Who are you? Well, I'm the pro wrestler, and I'm really good at pro wrestling, which is fine. You can have one or two of those. But what happens when they've got a roster full of those and go, okay, so we need something a little bit different? So I'll give you myself as an example, because I was, as I say, we've talked about this before, a failed musician, if you will. That's what I built my gimmick on, was the music side of things, because I had skills from that area. I had also done judo before. I got into amateur wrestling when I was in pro wrestling, and I've been able to use these things to build a gimmick around. And if you speak to people, it's often the things that you do outside of wrestling that help to build your gimmick around. You don't need to rush into it at 10 or 12 or 14 or whatever. I think you should go out and get some life experience, because getting life experience outside of the wrestling business is going to give you the foundation that you need to build a gimmick around, or a character around. I'm just looking at the comments, and someone said, I believe Pete Dunne was 12 when he started training. Well, here's the thing. Remember when I said you can get one or two of those folk who are really good at pro wrestling? That's Pete Dunne. He is in that 0.1%. I've wrestled Pete Dunne. I know how good he is. He's in that absolute upper tier. He's one of those guys that you wrestle and you go, oh my God, this person is just on another level. Again, if that's going to be for that tiny percentage of people, but that's not going to apply to everyone. That certainly didn't apply to me. Things, again, that, like I say, there's an exception to every rule. And he may have different opinions on the pathway to take. But for me, I'm just giving you Joe Hendry's perspective. And again, who am I to give out advice? But I'm just saying, I've wrestled thousands of people, no, maybe hundreds of people, and Pete Dunne is in that absolute top 1%. So that necessarily isn't going to relate to the people that I'm speaking to right now. Just in my opinion, I think if you do start wrestling at that age, you are kind of putting yourself at risk. But as I said, there's an exception to every rule. So at the end of the day, you got to make your own decisions. But what I will say is, I'm not going to tell anyone, if you get to, like in the UK, for example, when you're 16, you're basically classed as an adult. You can serve in the military, you can pay taxes, so who am I to tell you not to bump around in a ring? So people ask me, when should I start training? Personally, I think 16 is a good age. 16 is a good age. If it's your passion and you know that's exactly what you want to do with your life and you want to get into it, go for it at 16. But with an asterisk, what I would say is do not neglect your other hobbies and passions and things like that, because like I say, these are the things that you're going to be able to draw from as well as your experience in pro wrestling. I'm just keen for people to balance those things. And as brought up in the comments, yes, there are exceptions to the rule, but for me, my advice would be to wait until you're at least 16. I started when I was approaching 25. It was not a problem for me. It has never been a problem for me. In fact, I think personally, I think I would have been less successful had I got into pro wrestling at 16 or something like that. But that's just my life path, because I think I would have messed it up for myself. I would have been saying stupid stuff. I would have been too big-headed. I wouldn't have put in enough work. I wouldn't have been mature enough. And I'm not saying that, person X, Y, or Z, they might be completely different and focused in the correct way. But for me, I had to go out there. I had to, make an ass of myself. I had to really mature and I had to really learn before I got into pro wrestling, So that's just how it worked for me. So like I say, just to summarize the age side of things, like I say, is there an upper tier for age? Again, someone's just brought it up in the comments. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. If you're fit and healthy, there's no reason why not. I remember when I was starting training, like my dad chummed me along to one of my training sessions. I don't know if people know that word. Chum is like an Edinburgh word. It means to accompany. So my dad took me to like one of my first wrestling training sessions. I could see him thinking, oh, I might want to give this a shot. And at the time I was like, probably like mortified. But now, I thought maybe it would have been cool if my dad became a pro wrestler. Who knows, And he's like in his 60s now. And I'm not suggesting again that pensioners go around bumping all over the place, but I'm just saying I don't want to put an upper tier age limit on it because, as you say, age is just a number at this point. And as brought up in the comments right there, look at DDP, he was 35 when he started. So there we go. Age is just an excuse. Just do it. Just get in there, get involved. And if the in-ring stuff isn't working for you and working for your body, then you know what? There's so many other things that you can do. My advice is just get involved. On the lower age of things, again, I think that you should probably wait until you're 16. That would be my advice. Again, there's exceptions to the rule, but I would never recommend someone to start training before 16. That's just my opinion. I may be wrong, but that is just my opinion, and I've given my reasons for doing so. We don't need to go back and do it all again. But again, the fitness side of things. So like we said, the drills are pretty brutal and some people will want to get stuck in and go, you know what, this is my life now. I'm going to get into it. But what about the people who are listening to this who go, you know what, Joe, I don't want to get stuck in right away. I want to show up and be at least capable to do some of these things. How would I do that? Well, here's how. I'm going to tell you kind of what I did. Quick sip of coffee for me there. So, if you're like myself, I was kind of in my mid-20s, and my goal was, I had goals right from the start. I wanted to get in there, I wanted to make an impact immediately, and I wanted people to go, right, that guy is going somewhere, he's got something. So I started my weight training for probably decent weight training for about 3 months before I got into pro wrestling and really dedicated myself. So when I showed up, I was in half decent shape. That's what I did. 3 months of weight training. Now, this is what I'm going to do though. I'm not going to give you a weight training program right now. And the reason is because I am not in great shape right now. But if you watched ICW Square Go at the weekend, you will have seen a difference in my physique, a significant difference in my physique, because I have been lifting like a beast and my diet has been on point, and I've been, obviously you have a cheat meal here and there, but I've been really very dedicated. But when I'm in what I would consider to be good shape for a pro wrestler, or even great shape, that's when I'm going to tell you about, here's my diet and here's my exercise plan and all that. Because if you look at my body right now, again, I go to, people at the top of the industry and go, what are they doing? You don't take a look at me and think, well, Joe Hendry's the most ripped wrestler I've ever seen, so I'm going to listen to him right now on his diet and exercise tips. But what I am saying is in a few months' time, I do think that I will be in good enough shape to be departing advice about fitness and exercise and stuff like that. So we will do a podcast on, physical training and strength training outside of the pro wrestling gym and what you can be doing to prepare yourself, like I say, in a few months when I'm in the type of shape that I feel that I can be passing out advice. So I'm looking at the comments now. I'm just looking at that, and I will try and get to as many as I can. A lot of positive comments. Thank you to those who are checking out the podcast. So, yes, but here's what I'm going to talk about. So, I've said to you, wait until you're 16, because I realize some people listening to this won't be 16. They're going, well, that's all fine and well, Joe. Wait until I'm 16. Well, what do I do until then? Or maybe, okay, Joe, I want to start pro wrestling, but I'm not in the shape that I want to be in right now. I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want to do X, Y, and Z. What do I do? Here's what I tell people. And this is what I tell people when they go, oh, I've got a kid that wants to be a pro wrestler and they're 8 years old or 10 years old or 12, 13, 14, 15, right? This is what I tell them. Possibly one of the best piece of one of the biggest pieces of advice I could give you right now is get into a sport. Get into a sport, because the things that you're going to learn from that sport are not only going to propel you in professional wrestling, but they're also going to prepare you for life. You know, I look at kids that are doing amateur wrestling, and it doesn't matter whether they win or lose. It really doesn't, because you watch them, and I go to these competitions. I mean, obviously, like I've got in my category, but earlier in the day, you see the kids wrestle, and these kids are like 7 and 8, and you know, it goes all the way up. And I'm watching them, and I'm thinking, these kids are just badasses. You know, like this, what they're going through on that mat right now is more difficult than anything that, you know, work life or pro wrestling life could ever throw at them. And if they can get used to that now, then imagine how successful they're going to be. So when parents come to me and they say, I've got a kid who wants to be a pro wrestler, what I say is get into a sport. Ideally a combat sport, again, with an element of safety. So I would recommend grappling sports. I would not recommend a striking sport for young people. I think, you know, we know enough now about head trauma to know that that's probably not a great idea for kids. You know, I understand like boxing training if they're not sparring and stuff like that, but I just, you know, I wouldn't ever advocate, you know, go and get punched in the face. What I would say though is grappling is just, I'm so thankful for all the time that I spent grappling. It's been so helpful to me. So much so that one of the soundproofing panels just fell off the wall there. But there you go. It's live. What are we going to do? So, for myself, I would recommend amateur wrestling. I did judo when I was at school, and I feel that really helped me in adult life. I think jiu-jitsu is very powerful. That I would say there's certain martial arts you need to avoid because they're just rubbish. Like Krav Maga, for example, that is just nonsense. And anyone that tells you otherwise, I hate to tell you, you're wrong. Krav Maga is utter nonsense and will do nothing for you in a real fight. It's one of these kind of fake martial arts. Like I used to train at the Edinburgh Club. That's where like the Olympic judo team trained, and I'm not saying I was that great at judo. I did get my black belt, but I was basically the jobber of the Edinburgh Club. I got thrown about the place, but the guy who was like the head of Scottish Krav Maga held a class in the same building, and he asked to like spar me one time, and he was going to like embarrass me in front of all of his trainees, if you will, and I whooped him, right? And I was like the Edinburgh Club jobber. Now I know these guys were going to the Olympics and all that, so you know, a jobber to them is probably like pretty decent by all other standards, because they were literally, I was like getting whooped by Olympians, but I was not even really competing at that age, and I was able to comfortably defeat the top guy in Krav Maga in Scotland without issue. And if you're meant to be like the best in your martial art, you know, that probably shows how ineffective that martial art is. What I'm saying, folks, is go to martial arts where they actually have a proven rate of success. I think judo's a little tougher nowadays because they've outlawed the double leg takedown. But if you look at it, compare it to UFC, like have we had a UFC champion based on a judo foundation? Yeah, we have. Sure, it's not as effective as wrestling, but you've got Ronda Rousey, one of the most successful champions of all time, grounded in judo. You've got, obviously, you know how effective jiu-jitsu is, you know how effective wrestling is. If you pick up one of these sports, this is not only going to prepare you physically and mentally for the challenges ahead, because basically if you get used to competing is one of the most difficult things that you can possibly do. So if you're going to start, like, people don't understand, like, competing, like, the nerves that you have to go through, the emotions that you have to overcome. If you can do that, then trust me, you can get through your first professional wrestling match. Sure, there are different highs and there are different things to deal with, but they're different, but they're similar in a lot of ways as well. So I would advise competing, especially in a sport, and ideally in a combat sport, or even, let's look at, you know how they say that phrase, like, oh, well, it's not ballet. I've always thought that was a terrible comparison because ballet looks absolutely brutal. Like, you see what happens to their toes and all that nonsense. But that kind of even dance and gymnastics and things like that, those sports, I think, would certainly help propel you in professional wrestling. You know, even things like cheerleading and stuff like that, anything that requires, like, a finesse and coordination and competition, just any sport that you can think of, from golf to basketball, football, even like think about rugby. Basically, again, be careful with the whole head trauma thing with rugby, but so be smart about it. But what I would say to kids before the age of 16, and also to adults who want to get into pro wrestling but are maybe a bit intimidated by their first lesson, put it this way, right? You care about pro wrestling more than anything else. It's your passion. That's why you're watching this, right? So when you go to your first training session, you don't want to make an ass of yourself. It might happen, but whatever, right? We're all trainees. It doesn't matter. But you want to try and make a good impression. So, but are you that bothered about being a judo champion or a jiu-jitsu champion or an amateur wrestling champion? Probably not. So wouldn't you rather make an ass of yourself there and before you go to pro wrestling training? The point is, go to these places and just try it out and see how it is, because ultimately it doesn't matter whether you're successful or not, but it just gives you a little challenge to overcome, and it gives you some experience before you get into pro wrestling. And especially if you're a kid, if you've got a background in sport, or even, like I say, as an adult, I had a background in judo, and I felt that because of that, I advanced very quickly. So, like I say, having a sport, especially a combat sport, is just a brilliant way to go, whether you're a child or whether you're an adult. No matter what age you are, having a combat sport under your age, under your belt. I'm sorry, I'm getting caught up in words there. Having a combat sport under your belt at any age, that is my recommendation. That helped me so much with being confident in pro wrestling and all that sort of stuff. So that's, again, I hope that answers your question with when should I start training and what should I do to get myself into training. Another thing I want to talk about before that you start training is you really should have some goals and some ideas of, why are you wrestling? Why are you wrestling? It may be for several reasons. It may be because it's a passion of yours and you just want to enjoy your passion. You want to immerse yourself in it. I give you a disclaimer before you do that, and it's this. Right now, this may be the case. It was the case for me. I had a pretty stressful life, right? I still do have a stressful life, but I invite that. It's a good stress. You have to have some stress in your life to be successful, because nothing worth having comes easily, right? But in my life before wrestling, in order to deal with all the things that were happening in my life, pro wrestling was my escape. Now, you need to understand, you remember the Matrix where they go, here's the blue pill and here's the red pill? It's a choice, and it's the same thing when you get into wrestling. When you get into wrestling, you're going to need to accept that if you accept this red pill, wrestling is no longer going to be your escape. It's not. You're giving that luxury up. You're crossing the barrier you're crossing the barrier from fan to trainee, and when you do that, this wrestling thing that you go to for an escape from your difficult life, it's not going to be an escape anymore, because wrestling is going to present its own challenges that you're going to have to deal with. So you're going to need to find something else that's going to help you relax. Like for me, pro wrestling used to be my kind of zen moment, my go-to, and that just helped me wind down, and I got lost in it, Because like I said, when I was a fan back in kind of the latter days of school, The Rock said what I wanted to say to the school bullies. But the problem is when you get to the other side of that barrier, whether it be, in your late teens or when you're an adult, it loses something, Like I said, you can only see Vince McMahon in person once. And that first time, I'll never forget that. The first time I saw Vince McMahon in person, when you see, you only see Triple H for the first time once. You'll only see Hulk Hogan once. There's certain people that you walk past. Again, like Goldberg, there's certain people who I've met who have just got this crazy presence about them, and you just know when you see them that, wow, this is, even if I didn't know who they were, I would know that they were somebody. Right? But if you're a fan, seeing these people for the first time, like I remember, as I spoke about it on the last podcast in 2013, when I had my first WWE tryout and I kind of saw these people for the first time, it was like, whoa, it blew my mind. But then you can only have that first time once. And then once that's happened, right, you're in the business now. And so you're not so bothered about getting pictures of people and X, Y, and Z and all this thing, because you want to be a peer. You want to be the goal is to be on their level. That has to be the goal. And if that's the goal, you can't be a fan anymore. Like, you can enjoy it, but you can't behave like a fan anymore. You know what I mean? And that, for a lot of people, that's something they don't want to give up. A lot of people start training and realize that, well, actually, this is a whole lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Because a lot of people get into pro wrestling training, right? And you'll see a lot of people, they do these kind of stag do things where they have a pro wrestling training school, come in and learn wrestling, and people have a really great time, and it's all based around you, and it's all fun, it's all a laugh, and blah, 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 blah. That's not really representative of what pro wrestling training is like. I think most people that do pro wrestling, and the reason that most people quit is because they don't realize how difficult it is. And you have to have that deep, burning passion for it, or it's just not going to work out. So I'm just saying, before you get into it, just know that when you cross that barrier, when you leave that fan perspective and you become a trainee, you're really forgoing the right to use this as like an escape. And it's not, if you still can, that's amazing, but for me, I kind of feel like I need to switch off from wrestling to relax. So just, all I'm saying is just know what you're getting yourself into. But as I've said before, you may as well give it a go, because you don't want to go to the grave with that regret. Now, I'm just looking at the comments here. So the standing one says, I have 3 daughters and they want to be wrestlers. Well, 2 of them they do. They are 9 and 6. Well, like I say, if that is the case, my advice to you would be, let's get them into a sport where they can develop skill, and they can go through they can build up their determination and courage and skill level. Sport is the best way to do it, because not only is it going to prepare them for pro wrestling, but it's going to prepare them for life. I didn't realize that until I was an adult. I didn't really do elite sports until I didn't get into like amateur wrestling until I was like 27 or something nuts like that. But what I realized is sport really teaches you how to deal with all the challenges that life presents. And like I say, those kids who are doing amateur wrestling, when they compete, you see the kids come off the mat, and the ones that lose, they're in tears, but they've gone through things that most adults wouldn't have the courage to go through in their entire lives. So by the time they get to adulthood, they're machines, and they can operate on a level that most people could never understand. And if you want to be successful in pro wrestling, you have to be able to operate on that elite level, especially now. It is such a competitive business. It's such a competitive industry. Everyone's good now. So you can't just be good, you have to be great. You have to go in with that intention to be great. And you can't, it's difficult sometimes. Like, I'll get down on myself, but there are times where I have to go, no, you are good. You can do this. You can be world champion. You can do these things. And that's difficult to do, but I think amateur sports it's a great way to build that up. And look, you can pick any sport, and I'm sure you're going to find some way that you could look at how that would be beneficial to pro wrestling. I think most sports are likely going to be relevant to that. So, basically what we covered so far. So we've talked about, I feel personally that there is a kind of lower age limit when it comes to pro wrestling training. But again, there's exceptions to the rule. That's just my opinion. I would say hold off until they're 16, and also, again, this is something you got to watch out for. Again, unfortunately, there's wrestling's like any entertainment business. There are some bad people in wrestling who are going to have the intention to take advantage of people. So if, you do allow your kids to get into pro wrestling, even at 16, you kind of need to be on it and see what's happening, because, again, we've seen it. And time again, there are bad people in the industry. Unfortunately, not everyone has the best intentions. So please, if you are going to get your kids into pro wrestling, or if you're going to ignore my advice and get them into it sooner, then please you must keep a close eye on what they're doing, and you must pick, for God's sakes, a reputable training school with trainers who have achieved something themselves and trainers who have produced top-level talents. That is the way that you're going to give them the best chance of ensuring their success and, more importantly, their safety, okay? So that's kind of from a lower limit, from an upper limit, no problem at all. Thanks for commenting on it. And like I said, I will try and address as many of the comments as I can. From an upper limit, again, if you want to get into wrestling, I've said this before and I'll say it again, if there was an old guy wrestler and that was the gimmick, granddad wrestler or granny wrestler and they were getting over on the indies, someone would sign them. You know, it's that thing. I heard a phrase again from someone who is very high up in the business, said to me, listen, see all that you heard about, oh, you know, won't take this person because they're over 30 or they want nonsense. They'll take anyone who can make them money, you know? And I often think about that. That's why I don't worry about my age, because my age doesn't matter. I'm 30 years old, you know, so in times before that would have been way too old to go into these major companies, but I know I've got confidence in what I'm doing, and you know, my age doesn't matter. And like I say, we know more about health and diet and exercise, so I may be 30 on a piece of paper, but I certainly, you know, won't feel like I'm 40 when I'm 40, because I'm going to take care of my body and I'm going to do what I need to do to maintain my health, you know, and I'm going to be smart about what I give to pro wrestling, you know. So that's kind of everything that I think I'd like to cover in terms of, you know, the age limit and what you should do before you get into wrestling. What I would say as well is there's certain things, I think a lot of people, someone was saying there in the comments, how many pounds do I need to gain to become a pro wrestler? As you see in professional wrestling today, there's never been a better time to be a professional wrestler if you do not fit in to the archetype of what a classic pro wrestler should be. It's almost a disadvantage to look like how an old classic wrestler would look, because now, you know, the industry, in my opinion, tends to lean towards a kind of a leaner look. And a more athletic look rather than a bulky look, which is actually good news for everyone, because for me personally, I feel a lot healthier at, you know, 93 kilos than 103 kilos, and that's kind of where my weight will fluctuate between. I'm probably about 95, 96 kilos just now, but I have to say I feel my healthiest when I'm 93, 92. When I was doing amateur wrestling, I had to maintain 102, 103 kilograms. So, you know, just again, I did that for amateur wrestling, but now I'm going to go where I feel healthy and I feel lean and I can have better matches. And, you know, I feel I'm having better matches at 95, 96 kilos. That's not me saying you have to be 95 or 96 kilos, because, again, this is what I say to people as well. Let's look at Grado, for example. If Grado was ripped and jacked, then his gimmick wouldn't work as well as it does. It benefits him to look the way that he does, and that's nothing to do with his weight. Again, if you look at so for example, Rey Mysterio and what Rey Mysterio does, if Rey Mysterio was super tall, then it wouldn't be as cool, because it's like this underdog character, you know. And again, there's people of all shapes and sizes now. Niche is king right now, so just, you know, being different is great. So I wouldn't worry about, you know, oh, I need to be this weight or I need to be that getting into pro wrestling. What I would say though is, if you do have like, things are going to take time. Like for me, I've spoken about this before. My choice is I'm into natural bodybuilding. I've never, you know, taken anything that would be considered like a banned substance or anything like that. So it's like, I try and look at this from my perspective. And if you're coming at it from that perspective, then basically I accept, for example, that for me to get in shape, it's going to take 6 months. It's going to take a year. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I encourage you not to take shortcuts, you know, not to put your body at risk. I encourage you to do things the natural way, you know, and you get a greater sense of achievement, but it is going to take way longer to get in the shape that you want to be in. But I've got no problem with that. I've already signed up to the long game, so I know this year all I'm doing is trying to get in the best shape I can. In the last we're coming up to March now, so for the last 2 months I've just been busting my ass in the gym, and it's been paying off. But you know what? I know I'm not going to get to that optimal shape till at least halfway through the year at the very least. But I'm willing to put that in, right? So, like I say, you're looking at pro wrestling and you're thinking, well, you know, if you're someone who, when I started, for example, I was, I think, about 12 stone maybe, and I ballooned up to like 16 stone within that year, because I was literally eating 6,000 calories a day. And it was to the point where I was actually starting to develop health problems with the amount of calories that I was eating to get up to that size, and I had a huge pot belly and all that, and it was a foolish way to do it. I don't recommend you do that. And you know, I had no need to be that size. I just did not need to be that size, and you don't need to be that size, so don't worry about it. I wouldn't try and put your body in a state where it's not meant to be. But that being said, you know, if you say to yourself, I want to put on 10 pounds of muscle, then why the hell not? You know, I want to put on 20, 30 pounds, but I'm going to do it over the course of 2 or 3 years. That is long-term thinking and long-term planning that I encourage. So what I encourage you to do is to learn as much as you can about diet and about exercise and about weightlifting. And what to do is just look up the basics, the absolute basics, because the basics is most of it. Everything else is just kind of a gimmick, you know? Like when people go, oh, well, I've tried this new crazy workout and blah, 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 and oh, amazing. I'll tell you the diets that have given me results, right? The intermittent fasting gave me results, and keto gave me results. I wouldn't recommend that you do either one all the time. I'd recommend that you cycle in and out. Like for me, I was fasting today. I didn't eat till about 4. Actually, no, it was about 6 p.m. I ate. So I'm kind of, you know, eating at the moment. I'll have maybe one more meal, and then that'll be me after I'm done this, you know. So I'll have a short window of time to eat. And then on other days, I will have very little carbohydrates. Not none, but I'll maybe have between 50 to 100 grams, you know? So those are the two things that have worked for me. But as I said, I'm not going to be handing out loads of advice about diet and exercise and stuff like that because I'm not in the shape that I need to be in. But what I will say, folks, is just start to look up that stuff. Let's get away from wrestling to look at that stuff. Let's look at natural bodybuilding, look at, you know, learn about diet and nutrition, and YouTube is the perfect resource. If you want to know anything, just look it up. Just look it up and say, you know, basic weightlifting exercises. Again, I've told you guys, I think Sean might have just posted it in the comments just now. It's the only clip that I'm using right now is Training for Mass, and it's Arnold Schwarzenegger's series about learning the basics of weightlifting and diet and exercise. And yes, I know he's obviously taken a different path, but we can still use the weightlifting and nutrition principles that I think work for me. When I'm not intermittent fasting and I'm not doing when we're not doing low carbs like the keto diet, what I'm doing is 5 small meals with 40 grams of protein a day. Simple as that. That's my main diet. And then I'll throw in a little intermittent fast here and there, a little keto day here and there. Other than that, just keep myself hydrated in the gym 4 or 5 times a week. You know, walk the dog for an hour and a half, 2 hours a day. And that's, you know, that is working for me right now. I will tell you guys more in detail when I feel like I've got a physique that I'm happy to, you know, endorse, if you will. So, what I will say though, is if you are, for example, 300 pounds and, you know, you're not carrying it in terms of muscle, let's say it's fat, then let's look at wrestlers in the past. We've talked about Luke before. So, for example, if you look at, let's take someone who, like, so if you look at Dolph Ziggler, for example, you know, absolutely ripped, in amazing shape. If you're 300 pounds at the moment, the chances are that you're probably not going to get there super quick. But if you look at Mick Foley, for example, I don't think anyone ever felt that Mick Foley needed to be the most ripped guy in the world. We've spoke about this before, but when he was Mankind, in my opinion, his look was a 10. You could create a Mankind action figure and you could know exactly who it was. You do not need to be ripped. You do not need to be jacked for your look to be a 10. So before you start wrestling, I encourage you to engage in fitness and healthy diets and exercise. But what I would say as well is if you're 300 pounds, let's think about when I go into training, go into it with that mentality of if I'm a bigger guy, maybe I should, you know, train as if I want to be a big guy or girl in pro wrestling. What would my moves be? Maybe I'll ask the trainer, you know, what should I do? And the trainer, as I said, if they're at a reputable school, they should have their own opinions on these types of things about how you should be used. But if you're 300 pounds, you know, obviously there's exceptions to the rule, but doing a moonsault probably shouldn't be the first order of business. You know, it should be learning how to be a bigger wrestler. And that's kind of the psychology side of wrestling. And probably what I will say is with this series, I will try and depart as much knowledge as I can, but I still do, you'll notice I do believe in protecting the business to a certain extent. So that's kind of some more advanced stuff that I probably won't get into because that won't be relevant to you right now. The basics is what you guys need to worry about. And you look at world champions in any walk of life, right? And it always comes down to one thing. It's a ruthless execution of the basics. So that's all you need to worry about. When you get into pro wrestling, when you start, You don't need to necessarily be the absolute best, in, have the best physique, be the most athletic, whatever. You look at the early training footage of CM Punk, and his trainers basically saying, yeah, well, Colt Cabana could do all this stuff. Like, you look at who he's training with, and everyone else can do all the moves, and CM Punk just doesn't look that fluid. But CM Punk went on to be, one of the most successful wrestlers of all time, because he had that kind of long-term goal and long-term plan. And that's not to take away, anything from anyone else who was in that clip, because everyone that's in that clip, I think I can't remember which school it is, but, he's training with, like, say, Colt Cabana, Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels, like, there's some huge names in there, and they've all gone on to become successful, but my point was just about the CM Punk one is you don't need to be, the most athletic person on day one. All you need to have is dedication, vision, and consistency. It's never about, and this is the thing with any walk of life, it's never about the person who's the best on day one. It's about the person who's willing to put in the most time to learn and to improve, and who's going to be the most passionate about it, who's going to be asking the right questions. And I've looked in the comments, and someone says, I just want to know how to do a Canadian Destroyer. It looks so sick. And it does look awesome. Sean's saying, I want to know how to do a Spanish Fly. I just love that move so much. And sure, that, like, I get it. Those are cool moves. But again, that, if you have a good trainer, you are not going to go need anything like that for a long ass time. Because again, that's when people get into wrestling, that's what their expectations are. If you go to a training school and they show you the Spanish Fly or a Canadian Destroyer on your first day, and they ask you to do it on your first day, you should leave, because it's a garbage wrestling school. Because what the wrestling school should be showing you is the basics. And that will be a culture shock for a lot of people that get into wrestling as well. So when you start training, what you're going to notice is that, we're not really doing any moves. And that's a good thing. Because the moves will come later. That's the easy part. The difficult part is getting those basics down, developing those in-ring instincts, developing that psychology, developing, just all these things. These are the things that really matter. The moves will come later on. Once you have an excellent foundation, then you can start building upon that and going, we need some cool moves. And to be honest, I'm in that spot where I feel like, I'm a very solid wrestler, but I don't actually have that many cool moves, and I should probably learn one or two cool moves, So actually, I'm probably leaning more to the other side. I probably need to branch out a bit and look at that side of things, So that's what I want to say to people as well. This is something else to think about before you start training, is let's get, your expectations in check. Like, when you go to training, if you want to do these cool moves, know that you probably shouldn't be anywhere near them for months. Because if you try to do anything like that early on, you're not going to have that ring awareness. You're not going to have that that instinct of what to do. So it's not going to be a safe thing to do. Wrestling is something, it's hesitation that causes injuries. And unless you've done things and you've built up those repetitions thousands and thousands of times, you want to work on your rolls and your bumps and your drills. These are the things that are important, and you want to learn them from the right people as well. You want to lock up. You want to know how to put on a headlock. You want to know why you're putting on a headlock. You want to know why you're doing a headlock takeover. You want to know the why as much as you want to know what moves you're going to do. The why you're doing these moves is way more important. And again, it is funny because I always thought to myself, I need more cool moves and all that. But some of the workers I consider to be the best wrestlers are, for example, I think Daniel Bryan's one of the best wrestlers on the planet. If you look at what he does, he doesn't actually do a whole lot of moves. Yes, he does have cool moves, but they're spaced out in a very logical way. He is as good as he is because he's said this in interviews. He says, people ask me why I'm successful, and Daniel Bryan says, the answer is because my basics are good. And that's true. His foundations are fantastic, and because his foundations and his basics are fantastic, then he is a fantastic wrestler who's going to have a very, he's come back from injury, he's going to have a very long and successful career. I believe current WWE champion. So what more can you say? And again, if you look at what he does, it is, the basics. So we do live in a time where it's the era of the GIF, and people are looking at GIFs and going, "Oh, I want to do this and that." And yes, you need to have some of that cool stuff, but the basics are just what's so important. And I think that's one of the misconceptions about when people get into training, because they look at training and they have these expectations, just like I did, thinking of all these cool suplexes and flying off the top rope and this flip and that flip and all these things, and then the reality of training is something completely different. What you need to understand is, if you get into pro wrestling, it is going to be likely the most professionally rewarding thing that you ever do, but is also at the very same time going to be professionally, by far, the most difficult thing that you ever do. And I think that's when I was talking about that red pill, blue pill scenario, that's kind of what I'm trying to get across to people, is I'm trying to prepare you as realistically as I can for what you're about to get yourself into. Just, it's kind of that, it's an amazing thing, but it's such a tough thing to do, and it's really not for everyone, and that's okay. But as we've said before, you have to try it, and you have to find out. You can't go to the grave with that regret. There you go. So in the comments, someone said someone's behind you. I don't know if it's the reappearance of the infamous spider that was on a previous episode. I can't see them, so I'll crack on. But I'll look at some of the other comments. Someone was saying you have to learn to crawl before you can walk, and I think that's kind of the perfect way to summarize it. So I'm just looking through these comments, and like I say, thank you so much for everyone that does check out these videos. It means a lot. I've been getting emails basically every single day from people who are saying that they're enjoying the series, and it's weird. This is kind of a podcast that I was doing on the side, and this is actually becoming my most popular podcast. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone that's listening, and it's good to know that it's making a difference. And what I do want you guys to know, and when I say guys, by the way, I don't just mean like dudes. I mean, I say guys just like a collective to people, guys and girls that are listening. It's just my kind of collective word. I need to think of another word, but I just mean people, really. But what I want you to know is I am on March 1st, so that's in a few days, I am starting a Patreon. And it's for, not only for this, but it's to incorporate all the creative things that I do outside of my wrestling matches. So basically, all the content that I do. I do this podcast, How to Become a Pro Wrestler. I do the Joe Hendry Show with Dave and Jake, which is going to be on tomorrow. And I also do my custom entrances for my opponents. And as you may have seen, we put out a trailer this week for our brand new web show called Free Agent, which has got some amazing cameos. We've got cameos from Will Ospreay, from Grado, BT Gunn. We've got Kip Sabian's in it. We've got Justin Sizer. We've got Adam Pacitti. We've got Jack the Jobber. We've we've really pushed the boat out for the cameos here. And it's basically, we got inspired by Being the Elite, and we kind of, we're fans of Peep Show and extras, and we thought, Peep Show times extras times wrestling, you can't go wrong there. So if you could check out the trailer, that would be amazing. But basically, so I'm doing all this content. I'm doing that. I do my 2 video game streams a week, and I'm also we'll be uploading bloopers and stuff like that. But we're starting the Patreon, because when we're doing the show, I'm doing this podcast, I'm doing the Joe Hendry Show and all that, it does add up. So we've created the Patreon, and I will ask you guys to check out on March 1st. It would be really appreciated if you could do so. My neighbors are screaming. I'd really appreciate if they didn't do that. But there you go. Whoa. So I don't know if you guys heard that. It was a door slamming there. Sounds pretty intense. Anyway, back to where was the Patreon. Basically, what we'll have is one of the tiers is actually, I've got pro wrestlers in mind here. One of the tiers will allow you to submit your own topics to discuss on how to become a pro wrestler. So if you have something that you want me to cover in particular, then I will do so. On that, if you're in that Patreon tier, it will link up to the Discord, and in that Discord you can submit questions in advance. Like, I know I'll kind of have a chat with you as we go, on the chat as we do. But if you're in that Patreon tier, you can submit whole topics for me to discuss and do episodes on, and I will answer your questions on that and for the Joe Hendry Show as well. So please do check that out. The links will be up soon. March 1st they'll be announcing that, so look out for it. And before I go, I will take a few questions actually. So if anyone does have any questions that I didn't manage to get to, now's the time. And like I say, let's try and keep them topical. So I've been talking about basically. I've been talking about, when should you start training in terms of fitness and age as well. So Simon asked, Joe, with all your activities going on, do you have any future plans for any wrestling? Lol. So of course I do. At the end of the day, we put all this content out, but I am first and foremost a professional wrestler. It's just that I do professional wrestling at the weekends, and I have all this extra time, and I got inspired by Gary Vee and Cultaholic and Inside the Ropes and thought, you know what? I probably have something that I could offer here, so that's why we do all this extra content. What I would ask as well, actually, is if the main thing I'm promoting just now is if you could basically subscribe on YouTube. If someone could put up the link now, that'd be amazing. It's youtube.com/Joe Hendry. Every sub that we get helps, and we do eventually upload these episodes. But basically, if you do sign up to the Patreon, of course we do. Sorry, I'm just kind of trying to keep an eye on the comments as well. It's difficult to have two brains when it comes to that. Like I say, what we will be having is we do the kind of live chat like we're doing now, but to put out in podcast and video on demand format. If you sign up to the Patreon, you will get basically immediate access to that. So you'll get that kind of 3 or 4 days earlier than it will go up on the YouTube, and you'll get Free Agent a week earlier as well. So basically, we've got a tier for $5 that just unlocks all the content like that. And above that, that's kind of our interaction tiers and stuff like that. But you guys will see all the details on March 1st. So someone says, you said that Pete Dunne was a top 1% wrestler. What does he do that sets him apart like that? Again, I said I like to kind of protect the business to a certain extent. It is that sort of thing. I don't want to get too detailed here, but it is very difficult to put your finger on what it is. It's just that Pete Dunne not only knows how to, entertain a crowd and have the best matches possible, I feel like he knows how to get the best out of his opponents. And I think that his strikes look very vicious. His offense is vicious, but he will never... He will not injure his opponents. Do you know what I mean? His opponents will be showing up to the work the next day. Whereas you get some people whose offense looks vicious, but they're putting everybody in the hospital. Pete Dunne's the opposite. His stuff looks amazing, but he is a complete professional. I genuinely think I've wrestled some of the very best wrestlers in the world. I'm fortunate enough that I've wrestled Kurt Angle, I've wrestled Drew Galloway, I've wrestled Del Rio, and I honestly put Pete Dunne in that group of the very best that I've wrestled. Those that I mentioned are really the ones, to be honest, and Pete Dunne is certainly in that group. So like I say, it's difficult I can't turn around and say, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't train at this age. I'm just giving you the advice from my perspective. You're the one that's going to make that decision at the end of the day. So yeah. Again, so someone's asked, have you met or trained with Drew Galloway, aka Drew McIntyre, and what's your thoughts on his success? If you look back, there's several matches with myself and Drew. I feel like I learned more from him than any other wrestler, really. I think wrestling him, it really forced me to up my game, and it's something that I'm really grateful for. And I'm really grateful for the time that he spent on the Scottish and British wrestling scene. When Drew was there, it just raised everybody's game. He was the locker room leader, and for good reason. And I think everybody benefited from him being there. So I was kind of sad when Drew left, because him being there, it just, like I say, it raised everybody's game. Me in particular. I feel like he forced me to get better. I think that Drew's a fantastic ambassador for Scottish, British, and professional wrestling in general. The guy is a stand-up individual, amazing at what he does, and a locker room leader. and someone that is sorely missed on the British wrestling scene. But, you know, he needs to go out there and needs to fulfill his full potential, which, you know, is looking very big indeed right now. So I haven't spoke to Drew in a long time. I'd like to catch up with him and thank him for everything that he did for my career. But again, that is somebody that had a relentless passion for this and is such a hard worker, you know. So shout out to Drew. Also, I'm looking in the comments there. People are enjoying the free agent trailer. If you haven't seen it yet, please do check it out. But again, before you go, check out youtube.com/Joe Hendry. We've got these in video on demand format afterwards as well. But like I say, if you want to get them instantaneously, the way to do it is to sign up to the Patreon, which will be there on March 1st. Also, if you're watching on Twitch and you want to support us, you've got the Streamlabs link there. That is the way to do it. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, if you want to get a shirt, hendryshop.com. But we've got some cool new Patreon exclusive shirts coming very soon indeed as well. So, as always, let us know how you're getting on with your pro wrestling journey in the comments or in the Discord. We've got a Discord that you can kind of keep us updated and stuff like that. And basically, I'm in there every day speaking to the fans and pro wrestlers and stuff like that. So if you want to keep up with us, definitely check out the Discord. Check out the invite and come along. That's where you get all the up-to-date information from. I have been the prestigious one. This has been episode 7 of How to Become a Pro Wrestler, and it's all about when you should start training. If you are watching on YouTube, please do subscribe, like, and leave us some comments below. I want to know how you're getting on in your pro wrestling journey. I will go back and look at the comments and, you know, maybe we can give you some advice or anything like that. Just looking at the comments, yes, we do deliver worldwide at hendryshop.com, so fire away on that. Again, yeah, leave me a comment in the comments section and we'll hopefully get back to you. Let us know how your pro wrestling goals are going on. If you've started training, let us know how it is. Is it what you expected, or is it better than you thought? Is it worse than you thought, or is it just the greatest thing that you've ever done in your life? Because it certainly is professionally the greatest thing I ever did. The most difficult, but the greatest as well. And I think we'll call it on that note. I mean, the prestigious one. Thank you for watching, and we shall see you next time.